Okay, so let me tell you a story that is equal parts bizarre and dramatic. I'm not saying Katy Perry literally unalived a nun, but if you hear the details, you might start questioning things. You know Katy Perry, right? The pop superstar who's had massive hits like Roar, Firework, and Teenage Dream. She's made a name for herself with over-the-top performances, catchy tunes, and an image that's just as colorful as her music. Now picture this. It's 2014, and Katy Perry decides it's time to splurge a little. She's got all this pop star money, and she thinks to herself, why not buy a massive mansion in Los Angeles? It's not like she's going to settle for just any house. She's looking for something extra, maybe even a property with a little history. Well, Katy finds herself the perfect spot. But here's the twist. This mansion she's eyeing wasn't always a fancy home. In fact, this place was once a convent. A convent where elderly nuns spent their final years living out their peaceful days. It was a 30,000 square foot property, which is huge by any standard. And the nuns who lived there, they weren't just anyone. They'd poured their life savings into this place back in 1971. It was their home. They thought they owned it. This property had been owned by the Archdiocese of Los Angeles, a powerful religious institution. In the early 90s and 2000s, a lot of sexual abuse allegations had been thrown at the Catholic Church, particularly in the Archdiocese of Los Angeles. By 2007, the Archdiocese had been sued, and they had to pay a massive settlement to victims. $660 million. So with all that money on the line, the church needed to offload some of their assets to cover the costs. And guess what was on the chopping block? Yep, that convent, which they were now ready to sell. But here's where things get tricky. The nuns living there didn't think the church could just sell their home, so they kicked the nuns out. Understandably, the nuns were furious. They felt betrayed. How could the church do this to them after all the years they'd spent living there? But the church, being the institution it is, wasn't too worried about how the nuns felt. They were focused on making the sale. That brings us to Katy Perry. In 2014, she steps into the picture, seeing the convent as the perfect location for a huge mansion. She swoops in with an offer of $14.5 million, and the Archdiocese, without so much as a second thought, accepts the deal. There's no consultation with the nuns, no asking their permission. They simply go ahead with the sale. And obviously, the nuns weren't having it. They'd lived there for decades. It was their home, their sanctuary. And now, the church was selling it to some pop star they didn't even know. In fact, when they Googled Katy Perry to learn more about the woman who was about to own their home, they were less than thrilled with what they found. They weren't impressed by her music, to say the least. Songs like I Kissed a Girl and You're So Gay were probably a bit much for their sensibilities. But it wasn't just that. Katy had made a joke in an old interview about selling her soul to the devil. And that comment, well, it didn't sit well with the nuns, to put it mildly. So what happens next? The Archdiocese, wanting to keep the peace, arranges a meeting between Katy Perry and the nuns in 2015. They thought this might smooth things over. Katy Perry, for her part, showed up and tried to win them over. She explained that she wasn't really that into devil worship. In fact, she came from a deeply religious background. Both of her parents were Pentecostal pastors. She tried to convince the nuns she was a true Christian. To prove it, she even showed them her Jesus tattoo. Then offered to sing Oh Happy Day, a classic church song, to show them how sincere she was. But here's the thing. When you're trying to convince a bunch of elderly nuns that you're devout, singing a hymn from your phone probably isn't the most convincing move. The nuns were, unsurprisingly, not impressed. They weren't buying it. But the Archdiocese was determined to go through with the sale, so they didn't care much about the nuns' objections. The battle over the convent was just beginning. But here's where it gets even messier. The nuns weren't going to back down so easily. They were determined to stop this sale, feeling that they had a legal claim to the property. And that's when Hollister stepped in. Hollister, a 54-year-old businesswoman with a lot of money and connections, saw an opportunity. She offered to buy the convent from the nuns and turn it into a boutique hotel. The nuns, desperate to keep control, agreed to sell it to her behind the Archdiocese's back. Now you have two people Katy Perry and Hollister, competing to buy the same property. It was a legal nightmare waiting to happen. Of course, Katy Perry wasn't going to let this slide.
Oh.
She felt she had a legal right to the property. So she filed a lawsuit, not against the nuns directly, because that would make her look terrible, but against Hollister, the businesswoman who was trying to buy the property. It was now an all-out legal war between two women, one a pop star, the other a wealthy businesswoman. This wasn't just about a house. It was about control and ownership. The court battle dragged on for years, with both sides making their case. But in 2017, a judge finally ruled that the nuns couldn't sell the property without Vatican approval. This meant that Hollister's purchase was null and void, and Katy Perry could move forward with buying the convent. She had one, and it gets worse for Hollister. After the ruling, a jury found that she had acted with malice and fraud in trying to interfere with the sale of the property. As a result, Hollister was ordered to pay Katy Perry and the church $10 million in damages. That's a lot of money, and it financially ruined her. She had to file for bankruptcy. In 2018, things took an even darker turn. Hollister went to bankruptcy court, and two of the elderly nuns who had been part of the lawsuit came with her for support. And then right outside the courthouse, one of the nuns spoke to the media. "Please stop. It's not doing anyone any good except hurting a lot of people." Unfortunately, hours later, the nun collapsed from a heart attack and passed away. She was 89 years old. One of the other nuns claimed that the stress from the lawsuit had caused her heart attack. And honestly, who can blame her for thinking that, after everything they had been through, this was a tragic end to a long and exhausting battle. In the end, Katy Perry didn't get the property after all. She still needed approval from the Vatican, but the deal fell apart and the convent was never hers. The nuns, despite their best efforts, also didn't get to keep the place. So after years of lawsuits, court battles, and drama, it ended with no one getting what they wanted.